Hi. It has been a while since I've recorded a video. I've been reading A Storm of Swords, and it's long and it took a little bit longer than I thought it would. So we're gonna do this. Today we're talking about A Song of Ice and Fire, the third book, A Storm of Swords. This book, so much happened in it. Let's start with the summary. Where do I even begin? Let's talk about Westeros. In Westeros, the War of the Five Kings is still going on. Balon Greyjoy died, nobody really cared, so that's that. So with Robb Stark and his men, they had captured Jaime Lannister. Catelyn releases Jaime and sends him back to King's Landing with Brienne of Tarth. And basically she does this in hopes that she will get back Sansa and Arya to kind of guarantee that. Robb is, I don't remember exactly where he was out west, but he was fighting, you know, some stuff, doing some stuff. When they learn that Bran and Rickon are dead, Robb gets really upset and he takes comfort in the arms of a girl named Jane Westerling. Takes comfort, you know what I mean? And decides that the honorable thing to do is to marry her. Unfortunately, he's already made a pact, an agreement to marry one of Walder Frey's daughters. And he has that alliance with Walder Frey, who's like a really weird dude. But so he's supposed to marry one of Walder Frey's daughters, breaks that by marrying Jane Westerling. This alienates like his allies, but they come to an agreement that Edmure Tully, Catelyn's brother, will marry one of the Frey girls instead of Robb Stark. While Jaime is being brought back to King's Landing by Brienne, they are captured by Roose Bolton's like guys, and they try to rape Brienne, and Jaime is like,
no, she's like worth a bunch of sapphires or whatever.
And then they chop off his sword hand. But this whole time, Jaime and Brienne have like a back and forth where Jaime's like, ugh, Brienne's the worst, she's so honorable. But then by the time they get to King's Landing, Jaime has formed such a bond with Brienne that he actually gives her a sword and is like, hey, go finish what you started. Go find Sansa and Arya and bring them home. The reason she doesn't go back to Catelyn is because the Red Wedding. The Red Wedding happens when Robb and Catelyn and all of Robb's men go to marry Edmure Tully to one of Walder Frey's daughters. And he insists on having the wedding right away, so they go. But it turns out that the Lannisters and Roose Bolton and Walder Frey all work together, and they planned this so that when the Starks get to the wedding, they kill Robb and they kill Catelyn. And it is so sad, and it's just a really sad moment. Let's pick up with Arya. At the end of the last book, Arya escaped from Harrenhal with Hot Pie and Gendry. So Arya, Gendry, and the Hound get taken by the Brotherhood Without Banners, and then eventually the Brotherhood Without Banners runs into the Hound. So the Hound escaped King's Landing, is no longer working for the Lannisters, but he knows Arya, recognizes her, and takes her to ransom her to initially her mom, but then the Red Wedding happens, and they're right outside. They get there just barely in time, and they're right outside when it happens. So instead of taking her inside to watch her family die, he decides to take her to the Eyrie because he can ransom her there, and she'll be left with her aunt, Lysa. On the way to the Eyrie, the Hound gets really injured in a fight, and Arya basically leaves him to die. Takes a horse and goes to find a ship, and she gives the special coin that Jack and Hagar gave her in the last book. She gives that to the ship captain and says the words he told her to say, Valar Morghulis. And so presumably she's sailing to the Free Cities, or she sails to Braavos is what I think we find out. So she escapes from the Hound. Meanwhile, Sansa is still in King's Landing, kind of under the control of the Lannisters, who decide to wed her to Tyrion so that they can have like kind of some of that control of the North, because most of her family is, they're either dead or presumed dead kind of, so they're like, Sansa's the key to the North. So they wed her to Tyrion, and Tyrion will not consummate the marriage against her will, so the marriage goes unconsummated. So basically it's all a farce. But then really quickly after this, Joffrey weds his new bride, Marjorie Tyrell. Now the Tyrells are a really powerful house because they have a ton of like the grain and produce and stuff like that. They have the fertile lands, and so they're really worth a lot. They come to the city and they bring food and joy. He weds Marjorie Tyrell. Joffrey is the worst. He gets murdered at his own wedding. And it's amazing. It's honestly such a great moment. But during all this chaos, Sansa escapes with the help of Littlefinger. And Littlefinger eventually takes her to the Eyrie, disguised as his bastard daughter Elaine. Meanwhile, back in King's Landing, Tyrion is blamed for Joffrey's murder. And Cersei is sure it's him. She's like, yeah, it's him. And Shay, his love/prostitute or whatever, testifies against him in court. The night before he is supposed to be killed, beheaded, Jaime comes and frees him from his cell. Before Tyrion leaves, he pays a visit to Shay, kills her, and then kills his dad, Tywin Lannister, because Tywin is also the worst. Sansa escapes with Littlefinger. She ends up in the Eyrie. This is kind of the end of the book, actually, is while she's in the Eyrie, she's like making this little snow castle. Littlefinger comes up to her and kisses her. Lysa somehow knows this. I think maybe she saw it, and Lysa like calls Sansa into her moon door, which is this big hole in the wall where they push people out to execute them. They fall really far. Anyway, she is like bringing her to the moon door and is like gonna push her out, and Littlefinger comes in and is like, no, like don't be ridiculous, I've only ever loved you. And he goes up to Lysa and then he pushes her out the moon door, and then he blames it on the singer, who was the only other person in the room at the time. So that's just like, ooh, and that's kind of like where it ends. And then there is an epilogue. Let's catch up with Stannis really quick. Stannis's parts are a little bit boring for me, to be honest, but basically after the Battle of Blackwater, a ton of his sources are depleted. He does not have men or ships really like he did, but Davos comes through with those pirate ships and they sail north to the Wall because Melisandre is all like, the others are coming, and she like knows that. So they sail north to the Wall, and they go basically help the Night's Watch in their battle against the wildlings. But Stannis is kind of asking for the gift and some of the land around the Wall and some of the castles on the Wall. So they're not really sure what to do at this point, and I think they'll get more into that in the next book. But since we're up at the Wall, let's talk about what happens up north. If you remember, there was a big ranging party that went out in the last book. They ended up back at Crester's Keep, and so it was Jorah Mormont and some of his men. They had been attacked by others. They ended up back at Crester's Keep, and there's a huge mutiny within the Night's Watch, and a bunch of men, well, they killed Jorah Mormont, they kill Crester, and just all this craziness happens. Sam manages to escape during this with Gilly and her baby and takes them back to the Wall, which is like just so cool. And on his way back to Castle Black, he runs into Bran and company, who are trying to go past the Wall, and he actually helps them go past the Wall, but promises to keep it a secret that they're there. Meanwhile, Jon has been taken captive by wildlings and basically infiltrated them and tried to prove he was one of them. He had his thing with Ygritte where they got together and did some stuff to really prove that he was a wildling, but of course he was just doing that at Qhorin Halfhand's orders, and he manages to escape, get back to the Wall, but he's wounded by an arrow. But he does get back to the Wall in time to tell everybody, to warn them that wildlings are coming from the north and the south. They've climbed the Wall and are coming from both sides to attack, and this allows the Night's Watch to really prepare. Now they battle these wildlings for days. Mance Rayder has so many men, and they're doing a pretty good job, but they are just running out of steam and supplies and men. And this is where Stannis comes sailing up and basically saves them with his army. They're kind of in an awkward position where the Night's Watch, they're not supposed to take part in like political drama, but Stannis came and saved them, so it's complicated. Since Jorah Mormont was killed, they have an election to choose the new Lord Commander, and Jon Snow! He is chosen as the new Lord Commander, and it's a really kind of sweet moment, the way that Sam like helps that come about. Daenerys, if you remember at the end of the last book, was saved by a mysterious guy who kind of showed up out of nowhere. That guy turns out to be Barristan Selmy. So after Barristan Selmy fled King's Landing, he was like, I'm gonna go find my right queen. And he finds her and he saves her from whatever it was like a scorpion or something. Then they all go to Astapor to get her an army. And she gets all these Unsullied and is like, oh, I'll trade you like my baby dragon. Once she gets the Unsullied, she orders the dragon to burn the master and orders all of the Unsullied to kill the masters, and it's friggin' amazing. And so she frees all of the slaves of Astapor, conquers Astapor and Yunkai, which is a neighboring slave city. And then she goes on to Meereen, where she attempts to conquer, but Meereen kind of antagonizes her before she gets there by murdering, I think it's like 163, that might be wrong, but I think it's 163 slave children. They put them up on crosses, and it's horrible. So that really antagonizes her, and she's like, I'm gonna take this city and I'm gonna free these slaves. And to repay for all of the children, she crucifies 163 slave masters. So very an eye for an eye, which is kind of her style. It's fine. I don't know if it's fine, but it's her style. But she also during this time discovers that Jorah is a traitor. He's been the informant all along, but he did really love her, and so this is really hard. But once Daenerys discovers that Jorah was a traitor, she banishes him. You know, you do what you gotta do. Character developments. Wow, this book is a pretty good one for that. I think that there's, like, right off the bat one I just really want to talk about, which is Jaime Lannister. This is really the beginning of his redemption arc. This book is really highlighting that arc for him. The fact that he is so, like, disgusted with Brienne, but ultimately, like, becomes friends with her and sees her as worthy and as a sort of equal is just a beautiful, beautiful story. He risks his life and ultimately loses his sword hand defending her chastity? Defending her maidenhood. Her maidenhood. He loses his hand for that, his sword hand. And he was a knight of the Kingsguard. Like, his sword is his identity. Being a knight is his identity, so that's huge for him. That sends him into a massive identity crisis, and I think out of that identity crisis, he learns to be someone better. He learns that this isn't all he is. He can be more things. He can be better things. And that's a beautiful story. I'm so excited to have it continue and read more about it. I think really this development shows the most towards the end when he gifts Brienne the sword and is like, even though Catelyn is dead, like, you need to go find Sansa, you need to go find Arya, and you need to get them home and get them safe. And that is just such a 180 from what he was like in the first book, and it's just really amazing to see it. Let's talk about Jon Snow. He really kind of came into his own in this book. Having to live with the wildlings, I think he saw that there was a different way of life and a different culture, and while he didn't agree with everything that they did, he did learn to understand this culture, and towards the end of the book being voted as the next Lord Commander, it was really cool to watch him come into his own and ultimately in the end be Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Let's talk about Samwell Tarly. Samwell Tarly is always like,
I'm so craven, I'm so craven, I'm so craven.
and everyone's like, Samwell Tarly's so craven. He is killing others left and right, doing his best, honestly.
You're doing amazing, sweetie.
I think for Sam, he didn't know how brave he could be until he had someone or something to be brave for, if that makes sense. So once he has Gilly with him, he's suddenly like, oh my gosh, like I've got this woman that I probably love and this baby that I really have to protect, and that like kind of changes things for him. And he, I think, grows a courage he didn't realize he could have, and that's a really beautiful thing. Another one I like is Arya, because I think for the past 2 books, I think for book 2 and book 3, she was struggling with the fact that she was captive, that she really couldn't escape a lot of her situations, and not having that control. I think that's really difficult for somebody who is that strong and that independent. So when she escapes at the end, she leaves the Hound to die, and she gets on that ship. That is such like a moment of her really coming into her own, because she keeps saying she doesn't want to be meek. She's a wolf, she's a wolf. And she's just like fiercely independent, and she needs to go and like explore that and just get away from all of this. I mean, so much of her family is gone, and just feeling like she's not in charge is not okay for her. And at the end, she's really like, yeah, no, I'm peace, like I'm headed out and I'm gonna go do me.
We stan an independent queen.
Daenerys. There's 2 things that I think are really important, which is like she realized that she can't just conquer these cities. So in the beginning of the book, it's like when she gets to Astapor and like she's really just like, oh, I'm just gonna conquer them and free slaves. And by the end of the book, I think she realizes that I need to stay, I need to enforce this, and I need to build something better from basically the ashes of these cities. And so that was a really cool development. But the second thing we do really see is her eye for an eye mentality. She sees 163 crucified slave children, and she is like, I'm gonna crucify 163 masters. Blood for blood, kind of a thing. And so you see kind of that intensity, her Targaryen intensity really come out, as well as some very positive growth. So it's very interesting to watch her character right now. I'm excited for what is to come. I think that's about it for the characters that I really was interested in this book. I'm a Ravenclaw, so my general thoughts and feelings, oh, they're mixed. I loved seeing the development of Jaime Lannister. That was one of my favorite developments to read. Once again, another well-written story, just really well told. And I think I say this every time I review one of these now, but it's consistently true, which is that the way he details the stories really puts you there and keeps you there. And without those like special little details, it just wouldn't feel as consuming. You would just be like, oh, what a nice story, but it feels just like a tale and like you're transported. Truly, truly, truly. So overall, I just think descriptively it was beautiful, but I also think we got to see some amazing character development. And so this book is very character-centric, even compared to the others, which are also character-centric. This one in particular, you are watching the good, the bad, the ugly. So I think a lot of the themes in this are just fascinating about the complexity of morality, the complexity of relationships, especially like even Jaime thinking about when Joffrey dies. That I found really interesting, because by blood it's his son, but he was not raised as his son, so he's like not as affected as he thinks he should be. There's just a lot. There's a lot of interesting stuff to break down in this book. So I think that aside from being really well written, it's also just a thought provoker. And I love that. I love a book that you could really discuss and pick apart with like your friends. And so I'm a big fan. Good book, good story, good characters, recommend it. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on A Storm of Swords. I am super down to discuss A Song of Ice and Fire. I will see you later.